What's up, everyone? This is Bobby Douglas, and welcome to my official 2025 NCAA Tournament Bracket reveal. Normally, I record this video at like 12 or 1 a.m. after the first 4 games on Tuesday night, but I was so confused and torn on this bracket that I actually had to sleep on it again. So I'm coming to you with this at around 7 in the morning Wednesday. This bracket has posed a ton of challenges. I think there are some teams that are grossly underseeded, some that are overseeded. I think the 1 seeds are historically dominant, so I don't know how that factors into everything as well. So there were a lot of question marks I had, and so I needed a little bit of extra time to kind of process things and see where I wanted to go with it. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Every single pick in the 2025 NCAA tournament starts now. Hey guys, before we continue with the video, I just wanted to take a brief moment and talk to you all about Pool Genius. When it comes to March Madness, most people are filling out their brackets completely wrong and they don't even realize it. They pick their favorite teams, they follow the rankings, they listen to so-called expert advice, and yet without fail, their bracket is busted before the Sweet 16. So if you actually want to win your bracket pool, Pool Genius is your secret weapon. It builds your optimal bracket in under a minute, and the best part is, no research and no stress. Haven't watched a second of college basketball all season? No problem. You could still build a better bracket than the guy who's been glued to every game this year. And maybe, if you're lucky, even me. Getting your bracket is easy. Just enter your pool's details, and Pool Genius does the heavy lifting, creating a fully optimized bracket using the most advanced bracket picking technology on the planet. That's why 52% of Pool Genius users win a bracket pool every year, with over $2.5 million in reported earnings since 2017. So, if you're serious about winning your bracket pool, click the link in the description or visit poolgenius.com/Bobby to get the Pool Genius Bracket Optimizer, your unfair advantage this March. So we start in the South region. First game, we have Auburn versus Alabama State. Alabama State just won on that crazy premature Leitner attempt that somehow worked, but I'm going to take Auburn here. Really no qualms there. Louisville Creighton, this one's interesting because I actually like both of these teams quite a bit. The problem is that Louisville is somehow an 8 seed here, and that's kind of been the talk of everything. They should not be an 8 seed. You look at all their metrics, they're like probably around a 5 or a 6. So not only are you screwing Louisville, you're also screwing Creighton, you're screwing Auburn, and that's the problem with these teams that are grossly underseeded. It just totally nukes the entire pod, right? Also, not to mention that this game is being played in Lexington, which I don't understand how that's possible. You're, again, screwing Auburn, screwing Creighton here. But regardless of all the circumstances around this game, I'm going to take Louisville here. I really like the guard trio of Chucky Hepburn, Javon Hadley, and Terrence Edwards Jr. I think they're going to do enough to kind of stifle Stephen Ashworth offensively, more specifically Chucky Hepburn, who I think is a phenomenal defender. He's always active, always gambling for steals and things like that. And so while Creighton does have an advantage on the interior with Kalkbrenner, I think Louisville's guards and overall defense make the difference here. And I'm not sure Creighton can keep up despite me really liking what they've done this year, especially after a somewhat slow start for them. Michigan, UC San Diego, one of the most popular upset picks in the first round. And I think for a good reason. I'm going to take UC San Diego here. Michigan, I know they just won the Big Ten tournament, but I still really worry about their turnovers, and UC San Diego is the one team you don't want to see if you have a turnover problem. They're a top 10 team nationally in forced turnover percentage. Michigan, on the other hand, is down in the 300s when it comes to turning the ball over. They are really bad. They give the ball away stupidly, and it just isn't a good matchup for them. I know Michigan has quite the size advantage, but I think UC San Diego just kind of plays a style that's conducive to winning these types of games. They're going to shoot a lot of threes. They have star talent and guys like Aniwa Tate Jones, Tyler McGuy. And even though Michigan just won the Big Ten tournament, I still am not 100% sold on their guards. I think Trey Donaldson played awesome in the Big Ten tournament, obviously. Roddy Gale was really utilized as a cutter like he was earlier in the year, and I think that helps Michigan. But it just doesn't seem like a very favorable matchup for Michigan, given their weaknesses and UC San Diego's strength. So I'm going to take UC San Diego. Texas A&M versus Yale. I initially had Texas A&M here in all of my brackets. I just thought they were going to kill Yale on the glass, and it just wasn't going to be a fair fight physically. But then I kind of dug around in terms of the numbers, and Yale actually has a very solid defensive rebounding rate. They're a top 30 team in that category. And my worry is if Texas A&M actually can't control the offensive glass, I'm not sure how they score. This is a team that's near the bottom of the field in terms of effective field goal percentage, three-point percentage, etc. And I think Yale does enough defensively where they can kind of punish Texas A&M for missing all these shots. I really like John Poulikitis as a shot creator and a movement shooter. He's one of the guys who can absolutely take over an NCAA tournament game. We saw it last year against Auburn. Bez Mbang is a really solid point guard, makes good decisions, can get downhill and score. And then you also have Nick Townsend, who's kind of a 6'7" forward type of player who can finish around the interior. And so I came into the selection show really liking Yale and their chances to win a game. And I was initially discouraged by the A&M matchup. But after thinking about it a little bit more, I think Yale kind of has the shot making and the overall discipline to beat a team like Texas A&M that is so reliant on winning games in unique ways. So I'm going to take the Bulldogs here. Mississippi versus North Carolina. So we just saw North Carolina absolutely run through San Diego State. The game was over almost immediately. And I was going to have the winner of that game beating Ole Miss anyway. So North Carolina I'm going to have beating Ole Miss. I like Ole Miss. I think they had a very solid season. I'm just not sure where they get consistent offense from outside of Sean Padula. They have guys like Jamin Brakefield, Jalen Murray, but I'm just not really sold on their consistency as they've had up and down games all year. Matt Morrell, you could say the same thing about. North Carolina, meanwhile, I've seen these guys perform in the tournament, right? I've seen RJ Davis perform really well in the tournament. People can say what they want about North Carolina and how they shouldn't have been led into the tournament, and while I can largely agree with that, I still am also going to acknowledge that this is a very dangerous team because they do have that high-end talent. I'm a big fan of Seth Trimble as a third guard. Ian Jackson is a guy who can go on absolute heaters and turn games with his shot making, and so I think I trust the overall offensive attack of North Carolina more than Ole Miss, and so I'm going to take the Tar Heels here. Iowa State versus Lipscomb. This is a very dangerous game for Iowa State. So we know Keyshawn Gilbert is out for Iowa State, and that really limits their tournament ceiling in my view. But even in spite of that, Lipscomb is a very, very good basketball team. They're going to shoot a lot of threes. They're going to make a lot of threes. I mentioned it in my Every Team Explained video. All 5 of Lipscomb's starters have hit at least 30 threes on the season. Jacob Ognasovic is a really talented 6'8" wing/forward who can score at all 3 levels. You have guys like Giassi Powell and Will Pruitt who can all bomb from 3 as well. This is a dangerous setup for Iowa State. I think I'm going to take Iowa State here, though, just because I trust Tamin Lipsey, I trust Curtis Jones, and I really like the interior scoring of Joshua Jefferson and Milan Momcilovic. I think that's where Iowa State's going to really have an advantage, in addition to making Lipscomb uncomfortable with their perimeter defense, which we know has been elite every single year under TJ Otzelberger. So while I am worried about this game, if I'm an Iowa State fan, I still think they have enough to get by the Bisons, but this should be a very close game if I had to guess. Marquette versus New Mexico. This is one of the best guard matchups in the first round with Cam Jones versus Donovan Dent. And both teams, I think, are similar in that they don't really have a lot outside of those guys. I think Nelly Jr. Joseph is probably the 3rd best player in this game if I had to pick one, as a big guy who can get rebounds, block shots, finish around the rim, things like that. Overall, though, I think I'm going to take Marquette here for a few reasons. One, I think Cam Jones is just the best player in this matchup, if that makes sense. I think he's a little bit more reliable from the outside than Donovan Dent is. And I think they're similar in terms of being able to get to the rim, albeit in different ways, and then make plays for others. But I think Cam Jones kind of has that ability to not be sped up and just kind of get to his spot, which is insanely valuable in the tournament. 2, I also think Marquette has better perimeter defenders than New Mexico, which I think could really bother Donovan Dent, who has had some games this year where he really struggles turning the ball over. And while a lot of these are unforced turnovers, him trying to be a little bit too flashy, I think the pairing of Stevie Mitchell and Chase Ross are really going to make Donovan Dent work. And I don't know how Marquette's going to attack this in terms of trying to shut him off as a scorer or as a passer, but honestly, they might be able to do both at the same time. And again, this is coming from someone who had New Mexico in the Final Four last year, and albeit I was wildly wrong, this is a team I still actually like and a program that I respect the hell out of, especially as someone who really likes Marquette and roots for Marquette, having went there. So I'm going to take Marquette here. Last game of the first round in this region is Michigan State versus Bryant. Bryant is scary because none of their starters are shorter than 6'6". They're going to play super fast. But ultimately, I think Michigan State is just a better team here. I think the emergence of Jace Richardson has really propelled this team into a new stratosphere of expectations. and so I'm going to take the Spartans. But Bryant's a very fun and very interesting team to monitor as we head into the first round. Auburn, Louisville in the second round here, and obviously this is funny because Auburn was actually on the other side of this location controversy 2 years ago where they got to play 1 seed Houston in the second round in Birmingham, Alabama. Auburn was up by 10 at half in that game, but ultimately lost because they just couldn't really hit free throws. I'm going to say Auburn beats Louisville here, though. I just think they have too much shooting, and Janai Broome is just so good on the interior. I'm not sure Louisville has anybody to really deal with him. If you send a double, he's going to find the open three-point shooter. If you go at him alone in single coverage, then he's just going to beat you in the post. And just around that, Auburn's so good at crashing the glass offensively, and they do all the little things well. They back cut you. They get on the floor for loose balls. They keep possessions alive. And so I think this is the type of game where Auburn kind of shows its class over Louisville. We saw Louisville against Tennessee early on in the season just get blown out at home. And I'm not saying that's an indictment of Louisville's season or anything, but I'm just saying that with the step up in competition from the ACC to an SEC opponent and a top-tier SEC opponent at that, I'm just not sure Louisville really has the horses here to compete with Auburn, and so I'll take the Tigers. UC San Diego versus Yale. It's kind of nerve-wracking always looking at these 12-13s that I pick and then being like, oh God, I have to have one of these in the Sweet 16. But I'm going to take Yale here. I really like the shooting of John Poulikitis here. I just think he is a total game-breaking player. We saw it last year. I mentioned it earlier. And what's interesting about this game is that it's going to be a matter of volume versus efficiency from three. Yale is a very good three-point shooting team, but they don't take a lot of them, while UC San Diego is an average three-point shooting team, but they take a ton of them, right? I worry about UC San Diego's interior defense if they can't turn Yale over, and Yale's one of the best teams in the country at not turning it over. And so I'm wondering with UC San Diego's lack of size how they respond to that. But Yale, I just really like that big three of Townsend, Poulikitis, and Mbang. I think they have solid, rangy wing athletes that can kind of shut down a Niwa Tate Jones. And so I'm going to take the Bulldogs here to get to the Sweet 16. North Carolina versus Iowa State. I am very tempted to take North Carolina here, but I'm not going to overreact to what I saw last night. I'm going to take Iowa State here. I just think they're a little bit more disciplined and consistent as a team, even without Keyshawn Gilbert. We saw some great efforts from this team without him, especially that Houston game where they were also without Curtis Jones. Curtis Jones, I just think, is a total game breaker here. It's going to be really fun to see RJ Davis go against him, because those are two of the most terrifying scorers in this field and in this region. Iowa State's defense, I really just trust a lot more. I think they can really get under the skin of RJ Davis, and so that's going to be the difference maker here for me. North Carolina has also struggled with their front line throughout the entire season, and while I think Van Allen Lubin is probably their best option at center, and they seem to have figured that out, I just am not sure he's really enough to go against this Iowa State front line that's so scrappy, smart, and deep. So give me the Cyclones here. And then Marquette and Michigan State. This game I struggled with a ton. This is a rematch of the 2023 game where the seeds were flipped and Michigan State won as a 7th seed. I really, really want to pick Marquette here. I just can't trust their shot making. The difference here for me specifically, what turned it, I thought these teams were very close, but the free throw disparity is what's going to turn it for me for Michigan State. Marquette doesn't get to the free throw line a ton, and also they don't make their free throws at a good rate, while Michigan State is the exact opposite. Very good free throw shooting team, and they get there a ton. You could also look at the big men here. Michigan State can just throw a stable of huge dudes here against Ben Gold and Marquette. Marquette, I really don't think has any reliable player outside of Cam Jones offensively, and that scares me if he's not hitting shots, and he's struggled from three this year, but I still trust him. But if he's slightly off, I don't think Marquette has a chance here. I think he almost has to have like a Herculean effort to beat this Michigan State team that's so deep that can have so many guys turn games for you, whether it's Jace Richardson, Jaden Akins, Trey Holloman, all of those guys I would be terrified of if I'm Marquette. And so I really want to pick Marquette, and I think these teams match up very closely. Just the little things that I know Michigan State will bring, whether it's big man depth or free throw shooting, is enough for me to take them over the Golden Eagles here. Auburn versus Yale in the Sweet 16, a rematch of the first round game from last year where Yale actually beat Auburn. I don't think that's going to happen again here. Auburn is just flat out too talented here. I don't know how Yale even stops Janai Broome. I think he's just kind of a matchup breaker in this game. Miles Kelly on the wing. You have Chad Baker-Mazara, who could probably lock up Pulakitis as well. It's just a tough matchup for Yale here, and it's going to be when you're playing the number 1 overall seed in the tournament, right? So I'm going to take Auburn here. I'm not going to overthink this too much. And then Iowa State versus Michigan State. I would have had Iowa State here, but this is where I think the Keyshawn Gilbert injury catches up with them. I think Michigan State wins. Iowa State, while their offense has improved this year, I think they've shown in tournaments past that they can struggle when the game slows down and they really have to create in the half court offensively. And Keyshawn Gilbert is one of their 2 best guys when it comes to doing that. Curtis Jones is a real problem for Michigan State, but I think they're kind of equipped to deal with him. They have a ton of guys who can guard him and just make his life difficult. I think just the matchups don't really work for me without Keyshawn Gilbert in the lineup, so I'm going to take the Spartans here. And then in the Elite Eight, we're going to have Auburn versus Michigan State, a very chalky Elite Eight, I admit, but I'm going to take Michigan State here. These are the types of teams that Auburn has struggled with all year, whether it's Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida, Duke, these teams that are insanely disciplined and insanely tough defensively, right? This is how you beat Auburn, I think. You don't double the post and you make Broome beat you as a scorer, because while I do think he's a very solid post-up player, the numbers suggest that he's not as good of a post finisher as you would think he is. And so with Michigan State, you have 3 big guys who I think can hang against Broome one-on-one, and that totally takes away anything Auburn wants to do offensively, where it's the double comes, Broome immediately finds the open 3-point shooter. And Michigan State is one of the best 3-point shooting defenses in the country, in large part because they don't let you get open shots from there. And so while Michigan State obviously has their woes offensively, they're not going to shoot a high percentage from 3. I still think it's enough for them to beat Auburn here and get to the Final Four. They have enough shot making in Jaden Akins and Jace Richardson. I think Jace Richardson playing a significant amount over the last month and a half or so has really changed the outlook of this team. And so I'm going to have Michigan State in the Final Four. All right, next up we're going to the East region, and I promise you the next 3 regions won't take nearly as long as the South. The South was a totally different entity to me. I mean, that was probably the hardest region I've had to pick in a single tournament, maybe in like 6 years. So that one I felt like I had to do a lot of explaining. The other 3 are somewhat easier for me to kind of digest, so just keep that in mind. Starting off with Duke versus the winner of American and Mount St. Mary's. I'm not going to do anything cute here. Duke, Mississippi State, and Baylor. I go back and forth on this one. I think the spread's like 1 or 2, or it's hovering around there in favor of Mississippi State. I'm going to go with Mississippi State. I think the key reason here is that I'm just not sure how Baylor rebounds the ball or defends the interior. Outside of Norchad Omier, Baylor is a super small team because they lost Josh Ojianwuna earlier this year for the season, and he was their only real big guy. Mississippi State, I really like Keyshawn Murphy as a hustle, 6'10" energy big, and I think they just do enough to Baylor defensively to make them uncomfortable, and then I'm just not really comfortable in Baylor getting stops or getting rebounds. Josh Hubbard is going to be a problem for any defense he faces. He's just an electric guard. And then I think the wings like Riley Kugel and RJ Melendez kind of give Baylor some defensive issues as well. And so while I like Baylor, I like VJ Edgecombe a lot, I like Rob Wright a lot, I just don't think they have the defensive infrastructure to hang with Mississippi State. Oregon versus Liberty, I'm actually going to take Liberty here. I really like what Richie McKay has done in terms of being deliberate offensively while having a ton of shooters around, making teams play out defensive possessions and being patient. It's a really strong strategy, I think, if you're a team that's looking to pull off an upset like Liberty would be here. Colin Porter Jr., Caden Matheny, Talon Peter, I just really buy all 3 of those guys as play creators and shot makers. Liberty's going to take a bunch of threes. They play awesome defense. They take away the 3-point line at an elite rate. Teams only shoot 28% against them from 3, so I think they win that battle. And then just Oregon, I haven't really been high on all year. They had a really good November winning that Players Era Festival in Vegas that kind of gave them a really good resume early on. But this is a team that lost 5 straight in Big Ten play at one point. I think they've really kind of sputtered down the stretch. And to be honest, I know he's made a ton of clutch plays this year. I'm just not a huge Jackson Shellstad guy. I think Liberty wins the guard battle here and can hang on the interior enough to get by the Ducks, so give me the Flames. Arizona versus Akron. I think Arizona is just flat out too big for Akron, and I recognize that I say this every year about Arizona, how they're too big, and then they somehow lose to a team that's infinitely smaller than them. Think Princeton 2 years ago. But in this case, I think Arizona has kind of matured and grown as Tommy Lloyd has gotten even better as a coach, and I just think they have too much size and too much talent for Akron. So give me the Wildcats. BYU versus VCU. BYU is coming in as one of the hottest teams in the country from three. We all saw that 18-make barrage against Iowa State in the Big 12 tournament. But I'm going to take VCU here. This team is another one that's woefully underseeded. They should really be kind of closer to an 8, 9, or even a 7. But because their resume is lacking, that's why they're seeded so low. But that's to BYU's detriment here because VCU is an elite defense. They have tons of guys who will press you in the backcourt. And I think that's what gets BYU incredibly uncomfortable. You look at Yegor Demon, who really struggles against pressure. I think VCU can do a really good job taking away open three-point looks for BYU, and that's what they kind of live on. And so I like VCU here. I think they have the toughness and the overall ability to force BYU out of their comfort zone offensively to get this job done. I'm a big fan of Joe Bamisil as a driver and Max Shulga as a shooter, so I'm not really worried about their offense keeping up because of guys like them, and then obviously their defense being so good. Wisconsin versus Montana. I'm going to go Wisconsin here. Not really going to say much about that. St. Mary's versus Vanderbilt. I think this comes down to who has the most dynamic shot maker in this game. And I think that's Vanderbilt in the form of Jason Edwards. I'm a really big believer in him. He's a guy who has hit tough shots all year. He can get to his spots. He can score at all three levels. And St. Mary's, while I appreciate their style, they're going to play super slow. They're going to grab a ton of offensive rebounds. I just am not sure they have the offensive dynamism to hang with an SEC team that has beaten some very good competition this year. And I'm not sure if St. Mary's gets themselves into a hole that they can climb out of it given how slow they play. So give me Vanderbilt. Alabama versus Robert Morris, the auto bid out of the Horizon League. I'm going to take Alabama here. Just a absolute wagon. Not going to say much about it. Moving on to the second round, Duke versus Mississippi State. Duke is just ridiculously good. Not much more I could say about them. Even if Cooper Flag isn't 100% at this stage, I still like them over Mississippi State. They just have so many guys who can bother Josh Hubbard defensively, whether it's Tyrese Proctor, whether it's Sion James. I think that makes a huge difference in terms of how you beat Mississippi State. And Duke just has size everywhere. I don't really see any major weakness in this team, and so it's really hard for me to see Mississippi State winning. Liberty versus Arizona. I'm going to take Arizona here. Arizona is just one of those teams that I will never fully trust, but I will also always fear. Caleb Love is obviously a dynamic shot creator, assuming a lot of those go in, but outside of that, even I really like their length along the front line and guys like Carter Bryant, Henry Vasar, Tobe Awaka. Those guys all compete on the offensive glass super hard. You get guys like Anthony Delorso who can knock down open threes and is a great movement shooter. KJ Lewis is a stout defender on the perimeter, and the same can be said about Jaden Bradley. So I think Arizona has enough athletes defensively to kind of take Liberty out of their comfort zone. We saw that against Kennesaw State in the Conference USA semifinal where Liberty ultimately came back and won, but they didn't look comfortable generating offense against a more athletic team, and I think Arizona is just that on steroids, obviously. So give me the Wildcats again. VCU versus Wisconsin. I'm gonna take Wisconsin here. I really like their offense. I think Tanji is one of the most unstoppable players in the country. I know he's coming off that 1 for 15 performance in the Big Ten title game, but I think that was just a result of being extremely tired, having played 3 games in 3 nights or whatever, so I'm not super worried about that. The way he can manipulate defenses and get to the free throw line at will is really difficult for a team like VCU to defend. VCU could play 25 seconds of amazing defense, and if Tanji just wants to go and get a foul at the rim, he can, and then that's such a deflating letdown of a play, right? I like John Blackwell as a guy who can get into the paint at will, take tough shots, make tough shots, and where I think Wisconsin differs from BYU and why I have Wisconsin beating VCU as opposed to BYU losing to them is that the Badgers have those guys that can get into the teeth of the defense and then create open threes. Whereas BYU, I'm not sure I was confident in anybody getting downhill and collapsing the defense, right? And so Wisconsin has 2 of those guys, and that's where I think you get VCU into trouble. So give me Wisconsin going to the Sweet 16. And then Vanderbilt versus Alabama. I think Alabama is just too talented with or without Grant Nelson. It looks like he will play if Alabama were to get to this point. But Mark Sears has been there before, has had huge tournament games in the past. I really buy the 3-point shooting of Chris Youngblood and Aiden Holloway. Alabama just has so many dudes across the front line, whether it's Cliff Amori, whether it's Jaron Stevenson, Mo Diabate. I just think that's an issue with Vanderbilt kind of lacking size. So I'm just not really sure there's any one area that Vanderbilt excels over Alabama. So it's hard for me to pick against the Crimson Tide here. Duke, Arizona in the Sweet 16. This is a rematch from, I think, December where Duke went to Tucson and won somewhat handily. I think it would be kind of the same result here. Duke is just so good and so deep with Cooper Flagg, Kamen Maluach, Knipple, just tons of guys that can hurt you defensively. Tyrese Proctor, Sion James, I mentioned earlier. I'm just not really seeing where Arizona can get any advantages unless Caleb Love just goes on a nuclear heater like he did in 2022. But I don't really see that happening. And also, you have to withstand Duke's offense, which is very efficient and very good with the way that they can move the ball, hit threes, finish around the basket, and facilitate. Just an absolute wagon of a team. I don't see him losing to Arizona here. In the other Sweet 16 game, we have Wisconsin versus Alabama, and give me the Badgers here. I really like what they've done this year. Again, I'm a huge fan of Tanji, and I'm a huge fan of Blackwell. And then they have guys around them that can all hit open threes, right? And so I think that matters in a game where Alabama's going to take a ton of them, obviously. Both teams are comfortable playing at a decent pace. Alabama probably more so, considering they're the fastest playing team in the country. But Wisconsin, I think, can go shot for shot with Alabama. And where I think this game is won is in the paint, where I trust Wisconsin's interior defense more than I do Alabama's. Wisconsin's a better defensive rebounding team. They're a better paint defense than Alabama, and so I think that makes a big difference here. Wisconsin's really good at limiting paint touches and shots around the rim, and I think that matters against a team like Alabama. And I just trust the downhill driving of Blackwell and Tanji more than I do of any of Alabama's guys, maybe outside of Sears. And so I'm going to take Wisconsin to the Elite Eight. And then Duke-Wisconsin Elite Eight game rematch of the 2015 title game. I think it goes the same way. Give me Duke to the Final Four. Duke is just a monster of a team. I think they have the bodies to keep Wisconsin out of the paint. They have the length to recover and contest threes, and then I don't know if Wisconsin has the defensive guys to stop Cooper Flagg, Knipple, Tyrese Proctor, Sion James from getting where they want to go, and ultimately I think that's a difference here. So I will have Duke in the Final Four. All right, we move to the Midwest region. We start with Houston versus SIUE. Give me Houston. Shout out SIUE, though. Represent the home state. Gonzaga versus Georgia in the 8-9. A lot of people are on Gonzaga, not only to win this game, but to go really far in this tournament. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I do think they beat Georgia here. I really just think the guard play for Gonzaga is substantially better than Georgia's. And despite how good I think Georgia's bigs are, Gonzaga has the bigs to match it with guys like Ben Gregg, Braden Huff, and Graham Ike. So ultimately, the difference makers here are Ryan Nembhard, Hickman, and Caleb Battle. Just more reliable scoring, and so give me Gonzaga. Clemson versus McNeese. I did the whole McNeese thing last year. I'm not going to do it again this year. I just don't think they have the offensive consistency I'm looking for in an upset team. Clemson, meanwhile, I think is the exact opposite. I think they are so consistent and so steady on offense thanks to Chase Hunter and guys like Ian Shefflin, Victor Locken, Chauncey Wiggins I really like. And so Clemson, I just think, is not the type of team that you upset in the tournament. I really wanted to pick McNeese, but I just don't really like this matchup here. I really like their defense. I really like how they press teams, but ultimately this just isn't the right matchup, so I'm going to take Clemson. Purdue versus High Point. This is the right matchup, and I am going to take High Point here. I'm expecting this game to reach the 180s in terms of total, maybe the 190s. I'm not sure how either team gets a stop in this game, but ultimately, High Point has more guys that I worry about, 1 through 8 or 1 through 9, than Purdue. Purdue, I'm really only worried about Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn, and maybe Fletcher Lawyer. But with High Point, there are so many guys that can hurt you, starting with the backcourt guys, whether it's Keza Jiffa, whether it's Bobby Pettiford, whether it's DeMaurian Williams. Trey Benham off the bench is really solid as a three-point shooter. You just have so many guys in that backcourt that can really light you up. And I'm not sure Purdue has the defensive backcourt to really deal with that. High Point is really good at going on massive scoring runs. We saw it all throughout the Big South tournament. They'll get to the free throw line. They'll hit threes. And so ultimately, I just trust more High Point offensive players than Purdue offensive players, and that's a difference for me here. Kamani Hamilton is a solid front court player. You have Jocelyn Bodo, who I think can hang on the interior against Trey Kaufman-Renn as a 7-footer. And so ultimately, give me the Panthers to upset Purdue. Illinois versus the winner of Texas and Xavier. Regardless of who wins Texas-Xavier tonight, I'm going to have them beating Illinois here. On the Texas side, I really just value tough shot making in the NCAA tournament, and Trey Johnson is the epitome of that. He can hit any shot, he'll take any shot, and I think that type of player is really valuable in the tournament. Throw the percentages and the efficiency or whatever else out the window. And then on the Xavier side, same thing kind of with Ryan Conwell. I'm a big fan of his game. And so regardless of who Illinois plays, I think the best shot makers are on the other team, which worries me for Illinois. Kasparas Giacosonis started the season on fire from three. He's really cooled off as of late. I'm not really trusting anybody to hit shots consistently for Illinois. I know they have a bunch of freshman talent with Tomislav Ivicic and Will Riley and then obviously Giacosonis, but ultimately I just am not sure I trust them in a tournament setting, so I'm going to take the winner of that Texas Xavier game to beat the Illini. Kentucky versus Troy. Kentucky is really banged up, and Troy can kind of exploit them on the offensive glass maybe, but I still think Kentucky has enough to get the job done here. UCLA versus Utah State. Just no offense to these schools or these programs or whatever, but this might be the most boring game of the first round, in my opinion. I'm going to have UCLA winning here. I just trust their defense more than I trust Utah State's offense. I think Utah State's going to have a really difficult time generating good looks because that backcourt of UCLA is so good and so ferocious defensively. And then I like Tyler Bilodeau and Eric Daly as front court weapons with size who can step out, hit threes, things like that. So ultimately, I like UCLA here, but this game is going to be incredibly boring. And just on paper, it is. Sorry. Tennessee Wofford, give me Tennessee. Second round here, Houston versus Gonzaga. This is maybe one of the biggest swing games of the second round that we could see. I'm going to take Houston here. The Gonzaga thing is weird to me. I know they're like a top 10 team metrically, but if you look at their record against tournament caliber teams, top 100, top 50, it's really not that great of a record. You're looking at maybe like 7-7 if I'm not mistaken. And so again, not to play up the conference thing, but I do think the lack of competition in the WCC, and it's been a very solid league this year, but the Big 12 is just a different animal, and Houston dominated that conference to the extent that we've never really seen before, going 19-1. Their only loss came in overtime against Texas Tech, and I just really trust Houston to beat Gonzaga here. I know Gonzaga's trendy. I know they have the offense, but Houston also has the offense. They can also hit a bunch of threes. They have three guys shooting over 42% from three on the season. You have the big guys. You have the athletic defenders to really bother Gonzaga's front court, and so I will take Houston to the Sweet 16. Clemson versus High Point. Again, the same kind of argument I had in the first round with Clemson. They're just so steady and so reliable. They have so many guys that make winning plays, whether it's offensive rebounds with Shefflin, blocking shots with Victor Locken, making tough mid-range pull-ups and Chase Hunter. I really just buy these guys. And with High Point, it's not that I'm a huge fan of them. It's just that with Purdue, I didn't really trust them at all. Clemson, meanwhile, has a very solid defense. They're going to force turnovers, and I think that bothers High Point. Give me the Tigers. The winner of Texas Xavier against Kentucky. Once again, I will take the winner of Texas Xavier. Kentucky is banged up, and I honestly don't know how they stayed on the 3 line. The committee clearly valued that Duke win, that Tennessee win, that Florida win from early on in the season, but they're just simply not the same team. They say Lamont Butler's going to play, but at what capacity is he able to do so? Jackson Robinson's out for a year. It doesn't look like Herc Reese is coming back, and I just don't trust this team to get stops when it matters. I'm a big Otega Owe fan. I think Kentucky's offense is beautiful to watch. But with Xavier, I just think they're tougher, they're grittier. Ryan Conwell's a stud. Davion McKnight can make plays for others. Fremantle's really difficult to deal with as someone who can finish around the basket and step out and hit threes. And then Dalen Swain, too, is kind of this X-Factor, toolsy wing, right? And so I think Xavier kind of has the talent to beat Kentucky here. And then on the Texas side, again, the tough shot making, right? If you can hit tough shots, you basically make yourself immune to any level of defense, right? And Trey Johnson and Tremont Mark, both are capable of doing that. Texas has good guys on the front line with Caden Shedrick and Arthur Kaluma as a wing. You have Jordan Pope who can score. You just have so many guys who can make shots and create their own looks. And then I ultimately would trust Texas's defense over Kentucky's as well. So again, fully healthy Kentucky is a different story, but that just simply isn't the case. So I will take the winner of that Texas Xavier game to the Sweet 16. UCLA versus Tennessee. This game might be played in the 50s, but I'm going to take Tennessee here. I think Chaz Lanier is one of the most dynamic scorers in the country relative to how little he actually has the ball. He's kind of like Reggie Miller, where a lot of his damage is done off the ball and a lot of movement, catch and shoots, but he can also create off the dribble a little bit as well. UCLA just doesn't have anybody offensively to match that. Tennessee, I think, has been playing really well as of late. Zakai Ziegler is hitting threes, cutting down on the turnovers, and making plays for teammates. Igor Milicic Jr. is starting to knock down shots. And I really like Jordan Gainey as a spark plug energy scorer as well. So this will be a defensive battle, but ultimately I like Tennessee's pieces more than UCLA's. So I will take the Volunteers. Houston versus Clemson in the Sweet 16. Give me Houston, just better on both sides of the ball, in my opinion. Clemson's not an easy team to rattle, but I think if anybody can, it would be Houston with just the guys that they can send out on the front line. I think it would make Ian Shefflin's life really difficult having to go up against JoJo Tugler, Jawan Roberts, Javier Francis, things like that. And then ultimately, Milos Uzan, LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, they're going to all hit shots. And Uzan has done really well as of late when it comes to getting himself and others involved. He's really become the offensive engine for this team in the backcourt. I know Cryer and I know Sharp average more points than him, but without Uzan creating a lot of those looks and collapsing defenses, Cryer and Sharp aren't getting the easy open looks that they're getting. So overall, I just think Houston's a well-oiled machine at this point, and I will have them going to the Elite Eight, where they will play Tennessee. This is where the Texas/Xavier magic runs out. Tennessee is just so good defensively, and again, it comes back to Chaz Lanier, Zakai Ziegler, those guys really stepping up and improving, combined with that always nationally elite defense that takes away paint touches, contests shots at the rim, and makes life really difficult for opponents with the physicality Tennessee plays with. So I will take Tennessee to the Elite Eight, setting up a 1 versus 2 Elite Eight where it's Houston versus Tennessee. Ultimately, I think the defenses wash out, and I trust Houston's offense more than I do Tennessee's, with the outside shooting, and even guys like Malik Wilson and Terrence Arsenault, who are both very capable, tough shot makers. I think Houston is very capable of taking Chaz Lanier out of this game, and if you shut his water off, the entire Tennessee offense is really, really ugly. And so I think Houston just has more weapons, more counters to what Tennessee would do to them than the other way around. So I will have the Houston Cougars in the Final Four. All right, last region here, we have the West. We start with Florida and Norfolk State. This will not be a repeat of 2012. Give me Florida. UConn versus Oklahoma. A ton of people are picking UConn, I think rightfully so, because they're two-time defending champs. Danny Hurley's an elite coach, all that. I get it. Here's the thing, though. This UConn team is nowhere near where it was the last 2 years, as evidenced by their 8 seed. But more importantly, they can't guard on the perimeter, and Oklahoma has one of the best paint touch freshman in the country in Jeremiah Fears. I'm going to take Oklahoma here. I think they're going to be able to get whatever they want offensively. They have a ton of guys on this team who can shoot, whether it's in the backcourt with Duke Miles, Bryson Godine, Kobe Elvis. You also have Jalen Moore, who's a really difficult matchup at 6'7", but he's built like a truck. He can finish on the interior. He can also finish from 3. He hit 39% of his triples this year. And so I'm just having a really difficult time seeing how UConn keeps Oklahoma out of the paint and keeps them from doing what they want offensively. I like UConn's offensive guys. Caravan obviously is a very good player. Liam McNeely is a really good freshman. Solo Ball can go on heaters. But I think that perimeter defense does them in here. Memphis versus Colorado State. This is an interesting game just because Tyrese Hunter's not playing for Memphis, or at least it doesn't seem like he's playing. And that's a huge blow for them. But even despite that, I still think Memphis has just a little bit too much for Colorado State to handle. I love Colorado State. I think Nee Clifford is hell of a player, one of the best in the country, definite first-round pick in my view. But Memphis, with PJ Haggerty averaging 22 points a game and just being an elite scorer at all 3 levels, you have Dane Janja as a big guy who is just dominating the interior for Memphis. Colby Rogers can hit shots. PJ Carter can hit shots. Musa Cisse comes off the bench and is just a really good rim protector. It's just tough for me to see how Colorado State, despite having the best player in this game in Nee Clifford, can withstand all of that to beat Memphis. And I know Colorado State's favored. I know the numbers don't love Memphis, but against good teams this year, Memphis has played really well. And I think that's the type of thing that matters in the tournament, so I'm going to take Memphis to move on. Maryland versus Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon won a game last year against St. Mary's, but Maryland is no St. Mary's. This team is just too loaded. The Crab 5 is awesome. You know, they can all create shots. I think Derek Queen and Julian Reese can handle the physicality that Grand Canyon presents. And then ultimately, I just think they're a more skilled ball club. They hit more threes. They're great at finishing around the basket. And so Grand Canyon, I just don't think has the offensive shot making or talent to really match up with this Maryland team. Missouri versus Drake, battle of tempos here. Missouri is super reliant on transition scoring, and they'll play fast. They're going to try and full court press you, switch defenses, force turnovers, things like that. Drake, on the other hand, is going to play at the nation's slowest tempo offensively. I think slow beats fast here. Tortoise beats the hare. Drake is just such a well-oiled machine offensively. They are so comfortable in late shot clock situations, and I think they have the best player on the floor in this game in Bennett Sturts. He is just a Luka Doncic level player at the college level. I'm not saying he's Luka Doncic, but in terms of what his role is for Drake, it's very similar. He can hit off the dribble threes. He can make really good passes. He's a very solid defender. He grabs rebounds, and he just totally dictates the flow of the game in a way that Missouri doesn't have an answer for that, in my opinion. I think Drake is going to play the game at their tempo, at their pace, and Missouri is going to really struggle finding ways to score in the half court. And so I'm going to take the Bulldogs here to upset Missouri. Texas Tech, UNC Wilmington. I like Texas Tech here. UNC Wilmington isn't a bad 14 seed, but I really just believe in Texas Tech, and I don't think they'll have any issues here. Kansas versus Arkansas, battle of historic, legendary coaches. I like Kansas's top-end talent and experience more than Arkansas. I know it hasn't been a great year for them with DeJuan Harris, Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, etc., but they all have legit tournament experience and have either won a national championship or gotten to an Elite Eight. I just think that matters here when you're looking at an Arkansas team that's relatively inexperienced compared to that level, right? I know some guys on that team have gone on runs. Janelle Davis has obviously gone to a Final Four. Brazil went to an Elite Eight. I get that, but Kansas is just such a mature team, and while they haven't really played up to their potential, obviously, there still are a lot of guys on this team that I'm worried about. Boogie Fland coming back this late into the season after taking around 2 months off to rehab a wrist injury. I'm not sure how that factors into it, so I just think there are a lot more question marks with Arkansas than there are with Kansas, so I'm going to lean Kansas here and go with the Jayhawks. St. John's versus Omaha. Fortunately for trash cans, I think they're going to be safe. Give me St. John's. Florida versus Oklahoma. These two played in mid-February, and Florida won at home by 22. I don't think it'll be that big of a blowout, but I do think it would be a rather convincing win for Florida. They just have so much depth, so much talent at the guard and big spot that I'm not sure Oklahoma can really keep up with this. Florida's defensive perimeter of Will Richard and Elijah Martin, I think, will make life very difficult on Jeremiah Fears, who is prone to turnovers, and ultimately I'm not sure how Oklahoma stays in this game when it comes to rebounding and paint finishing, so I will take the Gators. Memphis versus Maryland. If Tyrese Hunter were playing, I would take Memphis. But without him, I just don't think Memphis has enough reliable offensive options compared to Maryland, where I know all three of their guards are going to score, their two big guys are going to score, and it's just a lot for Memphis to deal with. Tyrese Hunter is someone who I know can go off in big games. He did it at Iowa State as a freshman, had some good games for Texas in the tournament too. And so without him, I just think there's going to be too much of a load on PJ Haggerty. And Maryland is just such a well-balanced group, especially with those starters, that I think they get the job done and beat Memphis. Drake versus Texas Tech. I'm going to take Texas Tech here. I'm a really big believer in the Red Raiders this year. It looks like Chance McMillan and Darian Williams are going to play, in which case it really becomes a talent mismatch for Drake. I really like Bennett Sturts, obviously, but there's just so many dudes on Texas Tech that you have to worry about, whether it's JT Toppin, Williams, McMillan, Elijah Hawkins, Christian Anderson, Kerwin Walton, Kevin Overton. There's just so many guys. They can ramp up their defense when they want to. It's not been the most consistent on the year, but it's still very solid. And then offensively, they're one of the best teams in the country. So I just think it's a little bit too much offensive firepower that Drake can deal with. So I will take Texas Tech. Kansas versus St. John's in the Zuby Ejiofor revenge game. And I do think Zuby Ejiofor gets his revenge. Give me St. John's here. They're just so well-oiled defensively. I think Hunter Dickinson will really struggle against that front line and that length of St. John's. And then similar to what I was saying about Texas and a few other teams here, St. John's, I just really buy their shot making, right? And their numbers aren't great collectively, but I think RJ Lewis, Davon Smith, Kadari Richmond, they can all hit shots that are difficult, and it kind of makes them immune to good defense. And so I just think Kansas has struggled offensively all year. Neither team can shoot threes very well, but St. John's, I just trust their in-between stuff more offensively than I do Kansas, so I will take the Red Storm. In the Sweet 16, we have Florida against Maryland. Their starting fives can go head-to-head, but where Florida will advance is because of their depth. Maryland is so susceptible to foul trouble with either Queen or Reese because they don't really have anybody major backing them up, whereas Florida can send out a whole bunch of guys that are just massive. They start with Condon and Ruben Chinyelu, and then they bring off the bench Thomas Hout and Micah Hanlockton, who are both very big as well. Hanlockton's huge. And so I just think the depth wears Maryland down. I think the starters would have to play close to 40 minutes in this game if I were Kevin Willard in Maryland. And Florida just has so many different ways they can hurt you. It could be Walter Clayton shooting. It could be Alex Condon and Micah Hanlockton going high-low. There are just so many different ways Florida can come at you and so many ways that they can beat you that it makes it really difficult for Maryland, who really only relies on 5 guys, to keep up over a 40-minute game. So I'm going to take Florida because of their depth and their versatility. Texas Tech versus St. John's. I think I'm going to have Texas Tech here. Texas Tech has a bunch of really smart and intuitive passers, and I think that's how you beat St. John's and withstand that pressure defense. You can beat them by moving the ball and finding open shooters. And so I don't think it would be JT Toppin in this game that goes off. I think it would be Darion Williams creating plays for others. I think it would be Christian Anderson hitting threes, Elijah Hawkins getting into the teeth of the defense and kind of distributing. And I just overall trust the operation of Texas Tech's offense more than I do St. John's offense. And I'm just going to go offense over defense here and take Texas Tech. That sets up an Elite Eight of Florida and Texas Tech, where I will take Florida to the Final Four. Florida is just a machine right now. Obviously, we saw him run through the SEC tournament. I think Walter Clayton is one of the best guards in the country. He's almost Steph Curry-like in how quick his release is from dribble to shot, which I think is really difficult to guard. Elijah Martin and Will Richard can both knock down threes. Tommy Houck can knock down threes. Alex Condon can knock down threes. They have a bunch of shooters. They crash the glass really hard. They're one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country. They have rim protection. They just have everything you are looking for in a Final Four team. Texas Tech I really like, but I just don't think their talent is as dynamic as Florida's. And again, Florida is just so difficult to beat because of how much depth they have 1 through 8. And so I love Texas Tech, but ultimately I'm going to go with Florida advancing to the Final Four. All right, we have now reached the Final Four. First game is Michigan State and Florida. I'm going to go with Florida here. Michigan State obviously has had offensive struggles throughout, and while they have drastically improved on that end, right? I'm not trying to discredit them. Florida is just a different beast in terms of what they can do to you offensively, and then also how they can react physically to a Michigan State team, right? We talked about how Auburn can kind of wilt against more physical teams, but Florida isn't like that, and they have an offense in the same tier as an Auburn. I think it's a really fun backcourt matchup with Clayton, Elijah Martin, and Will Richard, and you can even throw in Aberdeen and Urban Klafchar there, versus Fears, Holloman, Akins, Richardson. But ultimately, I just think that the shooting, the size, and honestly, in terms of size and big men, Michigan State's probably one of the only teams in the country that can go guy for guy with Florida, right? But ultimately, Florida is just on another plane, skill-wise and talent-wise, that Michigan State just can't reach. And so I think this is where the ceiling of Michigan State is hit versus Florida, where they're just so good offensively and defensively. And it just makes for a really difficult matchup, not only for Michigan State, but for literally everybody in the country. Other side, we have Duke versus Houston. I'm going to have Houston beating Duke here. Houston's ball pressure and defense could rattle some Duke freshmen and younger players. We obviously saw Cooper Flagg's ball handling issues early on in the season. He's gotten way better as of late. Again, not to harp on the conference thing, but I noticed this with Gonzaga in 2019, that Gonzaga looked like one of the best teams in the country all year long, but they ran into a really tough defensive Texas Tech team in the Elite Eight and ultimately lost that game because I think personally that because they hadn't seen a defense like that since December. I think Duke could fall into the same issue this year where they are just so overwhelmed by this Houston defense and how physical they are and how athletic and deep that team is, that it's just a totally different sport compared to what they were seeing in the ACC on most nights. Now, Duke's defense is really good too, right? I could see them shutting down LJ Cryer and kind of forcing Milos Uzan to beat them from the outside rather than getting into the lane, and that can cause some issues as well. So I think this would be a very close, very good game, but ultimately I think I trust Houston and their defense and their experience a little bit more than I do Duke. But this could be like the closest, most hotly contested game of the entire tournament. I wouldn't be surprised. Both these teams are awesome, but I just am going to lean Houston here. And that sets up a Florida versus Houston national championship game. And ultimately, I am going to take the Florida Gators as my national champion. I think the final score is going to be 81-73. Florida is just so loaded right now, and they have been playing as well as anybody in the country. It almost gives me the inevitability vibes of UConn last year, and I know I didn't pick UConn to win at all. I had them in the title game losing to Purdue. But Florida, just the way they're operating right now, it's really hard for me to envision any way that they lose, if I'm being upfront about it. They have the depth, they have the elite shot making, they have the All-American in the backcourt. They can beat you in a variety of ways. They can beat you in a variety of game settings. And I think ultimately I trust Florida's versatility versus Houston, where they're much more comfortable playing in that street fight style of game. I think Florida not only can play in that style of game and win against Houston, but they can also play in a game. So I just think Florida has more ways they can find success. They are my national champion for the 2025 college basketball season. And so with that, my bracket is complete. I have Florida winning it all over Houston. And before I go, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has watched, listened, subscribed, liked, commented on any of these videos over the past year. I know I wasn't as frequent when it comes to uploads as I was in previous years, but I'm just very grateful that all of you have stuck with me and continue to make this channel so worth doing. So thanks so much to everyone who has watched again, and as always, give me your thoughts below.